Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you for coming to our colloquium about immigration. If this is your first, anyone here who's never been to Dorset Humanists before? Oh yes, well, welcome, especially. If you want to know all about what Dorset Humanists is, then there is a table telling you all about it at the other side of the room. The necessary initial thing to tell you are that the emergency exits are behind where Phil is working with the screen. Toilets you have to get to by going past the reception desk and down the steps and along corridor, unless Steve knows some other means.
They allow us to use the disabled toilets straight opposite.
Okay, that's good. Disabled toilets straight opposite. Could everybody please make sure they've turned off their mobile phones? We're not using a PA system tonight, so if you can't hear something, please indicate, but I think most of the speakers have quite strong voices. This is our second session at the Orchid Hotel. We've tried it once before last autumn. It seems very comfortable. Please give us feedback as to whether you approve of it. We'll aim to wrap up by 9:15, and then please join us in the bar for a drink. Now, I've called it a colloquium this evening because we are trying something a little novel. We have here in the blue corner David and Aaron.
Nothing blue about us.
Nothing blue about you, yes. And you are making certain propositions about immigration. And in the red corner we have Dan and Cathy, who are making other propositions about immigration. But I hope that this will not end up with one side feeling they've won and the other has lost. They will only have won if they persuade their opponents of the superiority of their argument. Now, I have actually seen this occur, but it's pretty rare. So this isn't a presidential debate. This is a genuine attempt to find out whether four people, all of whom are nice people, all very sincere people, can actually reach agreement on a matter which is of great, great importance. So I'd ask the speakers in due course to be as flexible and open to persuasion as they possibly can. Now, the format of the evening will be that each speaker will have 10 minutes to present their case and to introduce their case about what sort of immigration we want, how many people we think ought to come to this country, and what the limits should be, if any. I'm asking them to speak for about 10 minutes, which I will indicate with my kitchen timer. When it goes ping, that doesn't mean they have to stop immediately, but just please bring their remarks to the first available conclusion. When we have had those 40 minutes of impassioned presentations, to which you are encouraged to applaud if you feel it's deserving, then we will move the seating around and the four speakers will discuss among each other and ask questions of each other, strictly chaired, to see if they can reach agreement and to make sure that they have made their positions abundantly clear. Well, take something like 20 minutes on that. I may let it run on a bit further. And then after an hour of that, we will allow the congregation, for want of a more appropriate expression, to ask questions of the speakers.
Can we throw in some heckle while it's going on?
At this time, yeah.
Certainly, yes. The ground rules are that the speakers must be respectful to each other.
There is an egg shortage at the moment, so I don't think it would very
However, before we start, could we have an initial show of hands as to where everybody in the audience stands or feels about immigration? I'm going to offer you 4 options, so which I'll ask you to put your hands up to before we start. Please don't put your hand up until you've heard all 5 options. The current net immigration is, well, last year it was 504,000. That's net immigration. Otherwise, we've had 300 to 400,000 in the recent years. So that's one option, current net immigration. Yes. Or should net immigration be lower? And one suggestion is in the tens of thousands. Or do you believe that total net immigration should be higher? Or should you think that immigration should be unlimited? Or something else, if you don't want to answer any of these options. So can I first of all have a show of hands who wants the current net immigration, 500,000 or so per year? I think we've got one, thank you. Or not very certain. The current amount. So it was 504,000 last year.
And you want to vote for? Or
If you think that's acceptable.
A good level of it.
Right, okay.
Yeah, okay. The second option is the total net immigration should be in the tens of thousands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Sorry, speakers don't get to, I can't see them.
We haven't distinguished between types of migration.
No, this is I've been asked to put these questions to you all. Clearly, it's a much more nuanced question.
You can't answer the question yet unless...
No, okay, don't answer then. In that case, you answer 5. You don't want to answer. Anyone want to go for net immigration should be higher than the present? Higher. 1, 2, 3, 4. Right, okay. Anyone ask for unlimited immigration? Oh, right. And now for the records, I realise we haven't actually got an option for no immigration at all. We do have an option, however, for something else or decline to answer. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Thank you. Right. Well, yeah, you guys know who to appeal to now. Who are your... Right, okay. Well, that's... our first speaker is David Warden. Can you put the the little mic on before we start?
Yeah.
And your time starts now.
Why is the topic of immigration of interest to humanists? I think that immigration and all the debates and discussions about it link to humanist themes such as freedom, common humanity, common good, human rights, helping those who are fleeing from persecution. And it also ties into debates about nationalism, cosmopolitanism, racism and xenophobia. The human race has always migrated. Our ancestors migrated out of Africa and we've populated every habitable region on the planet. Britain is a mongrel nation. Celts, Vikings, Angles, Saxons, Normans, Jews, Russians, Poles, Indians, Africans, Chinese, Arabs. We're a melting pot. I myself am mixed race. I'm half English and half Welsh, with a smidgen of Scandinavian thrown in for good measure. But for the purposes of organising ourselves into governable communities, we also build towns, cities, counties, countries, nations, empires, and transnational organisations. Since ancient times, the concept of citizenship has implied settled residency, paying taxes, voting in elections, obeying the laws of the land, using its currency, speaking its language, having a sense of loyalty and solidarity, if not patriotism, and at least in recent times, if you're lucky enough to live in a developed country, benefiting from social goods like education, health provision, social security, decent roads, and so on. The boundaries of citizenship have never been absolute, unless you live in a sealed-off country like North Korea. People can migrate and become citizens of another country or have dual nationality. And under certain circumstances or certain conditions, foreigners can come to Britain and become naturalised British citizens with all the benefits and duties which that implies. Britain is not a monoculture, or at least it hasn't been for a long time. 200 years ago, when one of our humanist heroes, George Jacob Holyoake, was born, Britain was virtually a theocratic Christian state. You could barely do anything if you were not a Church of England Christian, and if you stepped out of line, as young George did, you could find yourself in jail. Since then, we've had emancipation for Jews, Catholics, and atheists, and since the end of empire, we've had waves of immigration from former colonies, bringing in non-native religions, cultures, and cuisines. Since the enlargement of the European Union, we've also had waves of migration from Eastern Europe, but also from our closest neighbours. At the same time, many Brits have settled elsewhere, including Canada, Australia, and the Costa del Sol. Before the new Labour era, my understanding is that net immigration to the UK was in the tens of thousands, and it wasn't a live political issue unless you belonged to the National Front, or if you lived in cities like Bradford or Blackburn, where Asian immigrants became concentrated, perhaps over-concentrated in certain areas, leading to the phenomenon known as white flight, indigenous people moving out of certain areas and immigrants moving in. But during the premiership of Tony Blair, immigration from the European Union became supercharged, and the net figure surged to hundreds of thousands every year. We became used to Poles and Romanians and other nationalities arriving here in large numbers. The perception, if not the reality, was that immigrants were undercutting wages for working people and using up spare capacity in housing and infrastructure. The situation was amplified by the migrant crisis in 2015 as a result of the Syrian war, with more than 1 million migrants and refugees arriving in Europe, and this was one of the key factors which drove the vote to leave the European Union. Some people on the Remain side of the argument framed this as xenophobia, racism, and Islamophobia, and made little effort to understand or empathise with reasonable concerns about uncontrolled immigration in terms of jobs, wages, housing, the composition of communities, and fears about highly conservative forms of religion being imported into the UK. Well, my position on all of this is what I would call reasonable moderation. Like all modern, developed and prosperous countries, Britain should be open to immigration to fill labour shortages which can't be filled by training indigenous young people, and also to give asylum to people fleeing persecution. But I'm not an immigration idealist or extremist. I think borders are essential, just as walls and fences are generally a good idea. This is because citizenship is based on certain rights and responsibilities, and a sense of community, belonging, trust, loyalty to each other, and a sense of solidarity. If the people who live in a geographical area have no sense of common bonds and no loyalties to the state in which they live or to the other people who live in that area, I'm not sure how a civilised society can actually be held together. If common loyalties break down, at some point a civilised society can become dystopian. Human beings have been programmed by evolution to live in social groups. These social groups have enlarged over time. Religions are one way to bind large populations together. nations are another way to create common bonds. At a more basic level, a common language can hold a large group of people together, and it's not all that surprising that states at various times have sought to suppress different languages and different religions. The liberal instinct is to do away with all of these limitations and to celebrate difference, diversity, and multiculturalism. The end point of this liberal idealism is to do away with countries and borders altogether and let people roam freely over the planet. It sounds like utopia, but my fear is that it could become ungovernable, anarchic, and violent. I think a moderate level of net immigration, let's say in the tens of thousands, is probably beneficial. But ramping this up by a factor of 10, especially when no one has actually voted for this policy, seems reckless. I think the UK should, of course, give asylum to people fleeing persecution, insofar as we can practically absorb thousands or tens of thousands of extra people. We have welcomed tens of thousands of people from Syria, Afghanistan, Hong Kong and Ukraine in recent years, and perhaps we can do more. People turning up on the Kent coast in boats operated by criminal gangs may be desperate, and they may have horrifying backstories. Our natural instincts may be to help them in any way that we can. But we also have a moral responsibility to maintain the rule of law and fair play in the asylum system, not to mention social responsibilities to the indigenous population, especially at the end of the lower income scale, at the lower end of the income scale. Allowing boat migration to continue is simply encouraging lawlessness, and my instinct is to support the government in solving it rather than encouraging it to get worse. So to summarise and conclude, migration is a normal and natural feature of the life of Homo sapiens, but so too is living together in settled social groups which are bound together by bonds of similarity and common culture. These groups have opened up over time. Britain is open to different cultures, and in many respects it is a multicultural melting pot, and no doubt we are all the richer for it. But I think we should be careful about what I call liberal extremism. Just because we've been enriched by multiculturalism and diversity does not mean that we should abolish borders and countries altogether, because civilised life depends on the maintenance of social bonds, trust, solidarity, and all the things which hold a country or a nation together, a kind of invisible glue. If we apply the solvent of immigration too liberally, my fear is that these invisible bonds, which we too easily take for granted, may dissolve completely over time. A future without those invisible bonds does not look like an attractive one to me. So the solution I propose could be called the Goldilocks solution. Not too much immigration and not too little, but just the right amount. Thank you very much.
Right, okay. Oh, you need the...
And get that clip on, thanks.
Yeah, okay. Okay, I now call on Aaron to give his particular interpretation and views on immigration.
Thank
Are
you
you
very
ready
much.
to go, Aaron?
I'm ready to go.
Your 10 minutes starts now.
Immigration. Why is it a problem? Not being as handsome as David, I had to have some slides to distract you, so here we go. Let's dive in. We need to introduce by explaining why is it an issue. I mean, first of all, what is a country? A country is a line on a map. That's all it is. It's a line on a map. It could be any map, and it could be anywhere, and any shaped line. It means nothing. The UK, as a line on a map, is not appealing to anybody at all, until the people in it do something. They build infrastructure, they farm the lands, they develop a set of values which make England and the UK a nice place that they want to go. So we stick a flag there. It's now a country. But a country is limited by its space and by all those resources, the values and everything within it. And unlike the United States that said, everybody come here, we've got loads of space, come on in, We kind of did that initially after World War II because we had a population problem. And as David pointed out, Tony Blair did it saying we could take 30,000, 300,000. I wasn't expecting that many, but we could take a few in. So we did. But we have to look at how the land is used to see how many people we can hold within it. Some statistics from the Office of National Statistics and various others suggest that 56% is farmland. It keeps us alive. 34%, which would have been 100% at some point, is all the green stuff that feeds us with oxygen and keeps us alive also. 2.5%, the green urban parks and gardens where we go off and have a wander. And the 5.9%, which has been built on by us Homo sapiens, as David pointed out. In the England part, 8.8, it's slightly higher and denser within our part. So let's build lots more houses everywhere, and then we can take everybody in. I mean, that's clearly what we're saying here, and what the solution to the problem is. Whilst every government tries to build more homes, 90% are typically built to meet the wrong audience. All those people on housing waiting lists, they don't get a look in. The housing target of 300,000 per year, over and over and over every year, isn't being met. We struggle to meet it. Out of the 157,000 that we built, just 31,000 went into social housing homes, affordable homes, shared ownership homes, which in themselves are way unaffordable. So if we had no babies and no one entered the country, it would take over 30 years just to catch up on today's figures. 30 years, it's just unbelievable. So let's get building then, that's obviously the answer. Let's get building then, lots and lots and lots of houses. Well, watch out for the wet bits, because the UK has a lot of wet bits. We can't just build anywhere. We've got floodplains and rivers and streams and all those things, and every time it rains, it floods. And that's a problem in this country, because we, in the past, Tony Blair's era again, built on floodplains, but that then just pushes water downstream to the next town or village that then floods. Watch out for the pointy up bits, sticky up bits, because we've got mountains and hills in this country. We are not Holland, we are not flat, we can't just build everywhere. We have problems and restrictions on where we can put a new town and a city. Then we've got those valued area bits, the bits we like, the national parks, the bits of scientific interest, the bits we like to go on holiday to. We don't really want to put a new Birmingham into one of those green parts, although that might be advocated later. Why is all this building stuff the immigration's problem? They don't care, surely. Well, it's actually our fault. Instead of turning people away, we let people in and then have no places for them. I mean, that's just ridiculous, isn't it? Imagine you guys have all got your 3-bedroomed house. I know you've got castles, because we're in Britain, everybody's got a castle, but you've got your 3-bedroom home. You've got 4 occupants in the bedrooms. You've also got a person on the sofa, because you're a nice, kind, friendly person, and you said, look, I see you're homeless, come and live on my sofa. However, somebody down the road, one of your mates, he's leaving his wife. He's on the waiting list. He's waiting for your sofa. He wants that sofa. But you said, well, look, hang on. I'll build an attic extension. I'll build an extra place so you can have the place. And then someone else gets the room. What? The person on the sofa say, well, hang on a minute. I was next in the line. The mate down the road, you built a place. How can I want to get in there? This is a situation on housing on the national scale. This is the situation. Immigrants jump to the front of the queue. Not their fault, our fault. We make the rules, but they jump to the front of the queue because of all sorts of issues. The government allocates immigrants to councils. The government has no housing at all. They allocate them to the councils. Councils have 1,000 plus on their waiting list already, so they put them into hotels. The councils want immigrants out of expensive hotels and into homes. So the immigrants meet the top gold criteria and local people can't get a look in. This makes immigrants unpopular amongst the population. Let's ignore those living here. What if we just built homes to meet the immigration? Never mind everybody else, we'll just pretend they don't exist for a moment. The Office of National Statistics, the figure we mentioned earlier, 504,000 people came into the country year ending June 22. We'll come into the breakdown of who's who later on. Which is substantial above the 300,000 and 400,000, which was the year before, which we already couldn't cope with. It was unprecedented. Clearly, they could be 500,000 homes required for 500,000 people. But let's assume they arrive in couples, which they don't, or arrive with their kids, which they don't. That's still 250,000 homes we don't have to give them. Our current build rate of 157,000 homes doesn't meet just the immigration figure alone. Other considerations. My argument has primarily been one of housing, but it's also space. With the green agenda upon us, with pressures building to 2050, we need to be more self-sufficient in this island nation of ours in order to meet targets. There's all sorts of feelings about this and things we could possibly fix. But addressing those, this means more growing food and less importing, because currently the ships use too much carbon. They will at some point get banned unless they can find a new fuel source. We need more water reservoirs to meet summer demands. We're going to have to flood more valleys or build reservoirs to accommodate that. More energy diversity for already increased population. These are also issues. Build more vertical houses, because more vertical places, because flats will be the priority. We can't afford a land for just one family anymore. This will be unsustainable. Further considerations on top of that. It's not possible to continuously keep building homes alone. Towns and cities have too many people paired to insufficient infrastructure and resource. Not enough doctors, schools and dentists, sewer pipe capacities, road surface water drainage, road capacity with extra cars. All of these things I could give you a half-an-hour lecture on in themselves. What is needed are entirely new towns and cities built from scratch, complete with all the necessary infrastructure built in. But this requires a new Birmingham-sized town built today, now, right this second, and then continuously built every 4 years, forever. Birmingham every 4 years? Yeah. We don't have the building capacity to meet 1 million homes every 5 years, nor the materials, even if all Europe's builders came over and gave us a hand. The carbon footprint of meeting this building need would be enormous. We would never hit our targets. We would be building on already scarce prime agricultural land, which in itself is in short supply and often underwater. The infrastructure of the nation cannot sustain an increase of this scale. A steady population influx of tens of thousands is a generic figure that is deemed capable of being met. Aaron, I get all that, but they're not all illegal migrants. Knew your question was coming up. Sorry, I did this on my laptop. This is David's, gone up slightly. If they are a refugee, if they are an illegal immigrant, if they are a worker or a student, they will all need to live somewhere. Each time an existing house is rented by any of these, the price goes up and availability of those living here goes down. Every person makes a difference. Even those coming with £1 million will take a house. A person moving here illegally jumps the queue, as they have no one else to fall back on for support. No friends, no family, no sofas, no attic extensions. They've got no job, no financial support, no means of gaining housing themselves. No private letting agent will touch them with no resources, and benefits won't cover the rent. They are a gold category and will beat everybody in this country, even if you've got 3 kids. Aaron, what is the bottom line? What are you trying to say? What is the argument here? It is wrong to prioritise non-members of the club, whilst those paying in get sidelined. So those people in the red line who have put the infrastructure in, put the farming in, put their money in, and develop the values to make this place attractive, they have a say in how generous they can be to people that haven't put that in. A nation's generosity to outside is a gift, not a right. We like to say human rights, we like to say rights. It's a gift of those people inside the red line saying, we will welcome an amount here that we can sustainably afford, but we can't say yes to the whole world. And finally, the cost to manage illegal immigration has to be proportionate to the national budget. When we say we can afford tens of thousands of people coming in, that's what we can afford. That's what the budget is afford. You want to do more than that, you're going to have to close hospitals, close roads, close schools to move a chunk of the budget into making it 10 times that of 100,000 or even 500,000. Thank you very much.
Good.
Let me turn this off if I can.
Right.
There we go.
Well, I thought we'd get some passion from Aaron.
Yes, I'll just set up Cathy's while I'm here.
Okay, now we'll get some more. Are we going to get some passion from you, Dan?
Oh no.
It looks as though Cathy is wanting to speak first.
No, I have to speak first.
Oh, right, okay. Aaron, Dan rather, please take over. You need a mic, indeed, thank you. Okay, your 10 minutes starts now, Dan.
Thank you. So, in a way, I would like to have less migration.
which might sound strange because I am actually arguing for a more relaxed stance on immigration. But I would quite like for all the people who have to flee their homes because of war, poverty, or whichever other disaster makes them think that Britain would be a better place to live. I would like for those people to not have to do that. It would be nice if there weren't asylum seekers in the world, but there are, and I do think we have both a legal and moral responsibility to take those people in. Even if it were to make our quality of life slightly worse, to have to take in asylum seekers, I think the alternative of having to send them back into a war zone is much worse. I'm mostly today not going to be talking about asylum seekers, though. I'm going to be talking about economic migrants, or people who choose to come here because they think life would be better here and they would like to work here. I'm not going to argue that Aaron's position comes from racism, and I noticed that Aaron didn't use any phrasing like a wave or a horde of immigrants. I do think that Aaron's position is reasonable. But I don't necessarily agree that having a higher level of immigration is necessarily a bad thing. I don't want to argue that we should let more immigrants in because they'll do the jobs that we don't want to do, like picking strawberries or cleaning, or that we should use them as a source of cheap labour, because I don't think it's fair to rely on desperate people for those things. I think that we should increase the minimum wage so that British people would enjoy doing those jobs more. But I do think that immigrants do contribute to our country through the taxes that they pay when they work here, and the work and skills that they bring, and the culture that they add to our own, like all people here, including people who are born here. Speaking of people who are born here, I don't necessarily feel that I'm allied to a British person, or somebody who was born here, more than I am to somebody who was born somewhere else. That might have something to do with the fact that I grew up with the internet, and a lot of my friends are from other parts of the world through the internet. And that may just be a generational thing. But I think I think that opinion is going to become more widespread in the future. Are we full? I don't think that we're as full as some other countries. I know that our population is a lot less dense than most Asian countries. I'm not saying that we should aim to become exactly the same as China in terms of population density, but I think we could get closer to Japan and still be quite happy. But let's imagine that we are full, and that the systems for housing, jobs and healthcare were completely full up and there was no more room. How should we respond to that problem? Should we reduce or limit the population size? If so, then why should we aim for immigrants as the target? Why not unemployed people or retired people or disabled people? Maybe we should send all of those people to Rwanda. I hope we don't do that. Another solution might be to focus on fixing the housing, transport, healthcare, inequality and job problems that we have in the UK, so that we can afford to look after not only immigrants but also the people who are already here. Does immigration dilute our culture and erode our values? Aaron and David didn't mention this, but it is an argument that we hear quite often from certain newspapers, who I will not name. I don't think they erode our culture, because I think that culture is resilient. And I'm going to read to you a short list of things that I've identified as being part of British culture. And I'd like you to consider whether any of these things will become less enjoyable because of immigrants coming to the country. Classical philosophy, tea, crumpets, sarcasm, queuing, Buckingham Palace, bad weather, postboxes, Doctor Who, cricket, roundabouts, fish and chips, curries, the opera, Radio 3, the countryside, the law, the university, both of them, and recycled Yes Minister jokes. That was a Yes Minister joke that I stole. Will we be prevented from practicing any of these? I don't think we will. If you enjoy one of the things on that list, but your neighbour doesn't, be it because they were born somewhere else or just because they don't happen to enjoy Doctor Who, that doesn't stop you from enjoying it in the slightest. I do think that immigration will extend this list as people bring elements of their own cultures to Britain, and we will hopefully be able to start enjoying those things as well. There is an argument about the difference, or the balance between avoiding cultural appropriation and wanting to have more integration between different cultures. But I, on the whole, I think that integration is a good thing. I would also like to finish by asking who is more likely to fit in to this country? Somebody who just happened to be born here, or somebody who chose to come here and had to fight to do so? Thank you.
Thank you, Dan.
Can someone do some techie stuff?
Oh yeah, you'll have to hand that over.
Where's the girl?
It's got a clip on the top.
Yeah.
Do you know which one of these it is? I don't know.
Can't read it. Sorry.
That's my problem as well.
The top one.
The top one. No, you okay with that?
Well, I don't know.
Yeah, double click.
Go on,
No,
just.
okay.
I'm not arguing for everyone to have brilliant skills on IT. I think that is an impossibility. I think solving immigration might be easy and get my IT skills good. How do I get it to go on?
Okay. Left.
That goes on.
Yeah, does it work?
I don't want to.
Okay,
It
yeah.
might be really surprising next slide.
Oh, my.
Okay, are you good to go, Cathy?
Yeah.
She has the microphone. Is that on?
Yes.
Oh yeah, that needs to be clipped onto your dress.
Yeah, start again.
Okay, that's good.
Right, I do understand it's not possible to have unlimited immigration, but I do strongly believe that the needs of desperate people are as important or more important than our keeping our current way of life just as it is. I want to look at this very much from the side of the people coming here. I'm going to talk about a family of Afghans that I knew who lived in northern Afghan in a rural village. They were a family of 8, mother, father, a 3-year-old baby up to a 17-year-old son. One night the Taliban attacked the village. The son was killed, as was the father's elder brother. They fled. It took a tremendously dreadful journey to get here. On the way, the baby died, and the 2 youngest children didn't speak for 2 years after they got to England. They still live after about 8, 9 years, squashed into 2 rooms in a friend's house, as so many immigrants unfortunately still do. They survived by the father driving the friend's taxi. The mother said she so much misses her way of life Afghan, but it wasn't safe. But the thing she does appreciate here is the education her 2 oldest children are getting at the moment. And then last autumn, I was tapped on the shoulder. I was walking along in Poole, and the girl said to me, the eldest girl, I've just got 9 A stars at GCSE. Now, that child wants to be a doctor, and she's going to be a credit to England, and we're going to benefit from her. I also like to talk a little bit about, I think her name's Dua. You may have seen her before. She actually won a medal. She was picked up after 3 nights in the sea off Greece by the rescue services. She was holding in her arms 2 young children. They weren't hers. They'd been put into her arms 2 nights ago as their parents had died. Whatever you feel about migration, the wrongs or rights of it, there's one indisputable fact. People are going to be fleeing persecution, war and famine in the world for the coming years. It's a ticking time bomb that has potential to disrupt all the lives of us comfortable people in the West. This flight has been fueled by communication and social media. More and more desperate people are realising the state of inequality in the world. They are seeing what they possibly might be able to have and what we've taken from them. They see what can seem like perfect societies, where they might be safe from war, persecution and famine. I argue but that's by strong-arm tactics to close our borders, we are fueling the flames of resentment around the world that can then actually increase migration. We cannot ignore this by passing laws claiming asylum seekers are coming by illegal routes. There are so few legal ones. Nor can we say fairly, we won't take anyone for who we're not the first safe country, unless we completely lack geographical knowledge. Sorry, I've ticked too much, never mind. We do have a moral imperative to stop refugees coming to harm in small boats. But legislation aimed at stopping those small boats may, unfortunately, as stopping the lorries, have unintended consequences. Boat traffickers have got so much money, they're not wanting to stop. They're going to persuade people to come even more safe on boats and land in different places along the coast, and where they'll probably more easily be trafficked into slavery. I agree that boat traffickers are immoral, but it's often not most unsafe prospect many asylum seekers endure. Many may feel it's just one more risk to endure with the many that beset them on the way. Unless we manage for 2 or 3 years to stop every single boat that comes here, take every person in that boat off, whatever they are, put them back to their own country immediately or to a safe country, it will not deter people. And this will prove impossible, because I got this from the Economic Community Refugee, I don't know what the is, group. These are safe countries they consider safe. I don't think many of these countries are going to want to take our refugees. And can we really imagine returning the Afghan family or Doha back to where they came from as humanists? Could we really think we could do that? Better, if not brilliant solution, I don't think there is any solution, by the way, is to increase the legal routes into England. I've not heard of many Ukrainians or Hong Kong people on those boats. But how do we decide who to offer sanctuary? Is it the Somali with no food? Is it the Iraqis fleeing a war and a situation that they didn't make? Is it the Syrians, the Ukrainians, the Afghans, the Hong Kong? Who deserves our help more? Why is it we treat equally desperate people so differently? I am being contentious here, or am I, by observing that possibly colour and money both decrease and increase our welcome? I'm not going to go over those figures, so I realise I'm going to go over time. But I think the thing that surprised me about the amount of immigration into England with 277,000 were students. I hadn't realised that many. I'm not saying they should or shouldn't come, but it does make a difference to the figures. I propose we set up jointly with the rest of Europe and the Western world centres where people can stay while they seek asylum in different countries, but they don't want to turn into camps like there are in Syria or are in Jordan that generations but live, because that's destroying life. There is no life for living in a refugee camp and always being the receiver and having nothing to do. And then the Parliamentary Cross-Party Select Committee on Immigration, who were told by Suella Braverman there are currently no legal routes at all that a 16-year-old East African child feeling persecuted can enter this country. There might be an answer if we didn't have illegal routes and we went by the 1951 Refugee Convention. So the core principle is no refugee should return to a country where they face serious threat. And I say no food is a serious threat. We also increase greatly our contribution both to finance and manpower to International Crime Agency to pursue globally the people who are offering via social media an escape to a better life. I don't know if any of you heard it. I think it was called the Boat People. I'm not quite sure, but on Monday evening, trying to think about solutions, but it's got to be such a big business. It's like drugs. It's almost insoluble. As I'm saying, I'm offering no solutions. As a country, we also increase greatly our contribution. As a country, we need to take responsibility for refugees fairly, so no one section of our society has to be more affected than the others. To do this, I'm sorry, Aaron, but we do need to change our planning laws for housing. We do need to up the 5% maybe to 10%. And we do need to rejig our tax systems where we have a wealth tax on very expensive housing. We do need to say we stop second homes. We need to stay investment in London where so many places are underused. And this is my real hope for a solution, that the COP conferences, world conferences, that get together and try and push targets for reducing carbon, get together and try planning how we can actually do something for all the people who need it in the world. When considering how many refugees we as a country can reasonably accommodate, we do have to look back in history of how our actions, along with many, many other factors, have led to the current global situation. We did colonise the world, and the point that the people in England, they have their wealth, they created it, but I don't think we would have created such a wealth if we hadn't taken resources from other parts of the world. We have to take our responsibility of building some of our wealth on the amount of carbon in the climate change that's affecting so much migration. Asia, there used to be roaming freely, not completely freely, there were tribes, but we drew the lines. We drew the lines across so many countries and put people together and got to borders where there were no borders. And that's created tension and that's created wars. We've taken resources, we drew those lines for probably so we could gain the oil. I don't think going out as Christians saying live our way of life is necessarily being a good thing. The English language and way of life. We say we are a brilliant country or a wonderful country. We have democracy. Our language is brilliant. People learn our language and they hear that we're a wonderful democratic country. No wonder people try to come here to breathe things. This I don't know I should have put in. Apologies for what we've done in the past are easy, but atonement is hard. To be called a refugee is the opposite of an insult. It's a badge of strength, courage and victory, because I don't think I could face that journey, any of the journeys. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Well done, Cathy. I think that was a brilliant view. No, please. We're now going to move our seats around so that we can engage in part two of this debate. So if we can have the blue team over there.
Simon, I thought we weren't being contentious. I think we want to be over there.
Well, Aaron and David then.
Sorry?
Aaron and David can sit over there, and you and Dan.
Is that blue in the UK sense or the American sense?
And I actually wouldn't say it was a red point of view, mine at the moment. It's not exactly Labour, isn't it?
Oh, please do whatever is helpful. Right.
Are you going in the middle, are you?
I'm trying to work out how. I think it's probably best if I actually go in the middle like this. Yeah, if you two would like to. Cathy has very helpfully identified a key issue, and I'll ask the panel to discuss that key issue straight away before we deal with any general issues, and that is the Refugee Convention. Now, I noted that Aaron seemed to conflate illegal immigrants with refugees. Perhaps he can explain how they can be both later. But I'd ask you now, lady and gentlemen, to devote yourselves to the question as to whether it is appropriate for Britain to remain a signatory to the Refugee Convention, or we can get rid of all these nasty illegals by just choosing to change the law. So, anyone want to kick off first? Please do, David.
After you, Dan.
I was just going to make a quick point about refugee laws, which is that I don't believe there is such a thing as an illegal way of getting into the country. If somebody arrives in the country via irregular methods, coming over on a boat or smuggling themselves in on a truck or whichever other way, if they then claim asylum, I believe that that's a perfectly lawful thing for them to do under international law. If we reject their asylum case, then I suppose not. But if they're an asylum seeker, they should be allowed to do that. And also the issue of first safe country, I don't think that that's a legal thing anywhere in international law, because imagine it was the case that as an asylum seeker you had to stop at the first safe country you arrived at. Well, the country's neighbouring war zones would have to take all the asylum seekers, and then short of a war in Ireland or a revolution in France, we would never see any.
Thank you. Oh, everybody wants to speak. I'm going to, ladies first here.
No, actually not, because I forgot what I was going to say then, because there's so many things I could say.
Aaron then.
If a person enters your home, they can claim squatters' rights. Tough. So it's the same kind of thing. If you went to a country illegally, there are various methods you can come into the country. You can apply for a visa, you can apply to come in post, you can come on a job application, you can come on an invitation from Hong Kong and Ukraine. There are a whole lot of areas you can come in. If you circumvent, I did have a whole list of what states are illegal migrants, but there wasn't time. If you come in through one of those routes or you overstay a visa, you are then illegal. You've said if you come over like a student, I come over, I'm going to do 6 months of learning and then I'll go home. On your 7th month, you are illegal. There are states of illegal because we can't hold the whole country.
Right, thank you. I think there's a point we can clarify here. Yes, there are people who are illegal, who overstay, and the advice I would give any asylum seeker is just disappear into the country. The Home Office won't find you.
So you're encouraging lawlessness, Chairman?
No, I was...
They can't rent, they can't go to anywhere.
Indeed, yes.
They can only work illegally. For
yes,
hand,
yeah.
Breaking attacks, breaking into places, robbing people.
Indeed. No, such people are illegal, but would you allow that those are not the same as people who have claimed asylum and been accepted as refugees?
Let me ask the million-plus waiting people on the housing waiting list if they mind somebody jump in the queue.
Can I?
I think, yeah, okay. Well, in that case, do you want to answer the question I posed? Do you want Britain to leave the Refugee Convention?
Without reading it all, I wouldn't know, but I would have to refer that to David, who's probably...
Okay, right. Let's ask Cathy to speak now she's remembered what the question was.
Well, I go back to the... I think probably a lot of you saw the video of the Parliamentary Cross Committee on Immigration, when Suella Braverman was asked how somebody who had an aunt, I think it was an aunt in England, who was legally here, and it was their only relative, and they were 16 and they were being persecuted, how they got to England by any of her legal routes, because I would argue also who makes it legal, who says it's legal. And she couldn't, because there were no routes. And so at the moment, what routes are there for Iraq, people from Iraq? We caused that war in an awful lot of ways, or from Iran, or now from Syria. I know there were, but they closed that route now and they haven't reopened the other one. For someone in persecution in Kenya, so many places, people in starving in Eritrea. What are the legal routes?
That's a different question.
That is a different question,
well, no,
indeed.
I think
yes.
You can't. There are no legal routes, so you can't say something's illegal if there's nothing legal way of doing it. You're just saying we can't have anybody.
Okay, I don't want to get too hung up on a terminological issue. It looks like David is going to resolve that.
I don't know about resolving that, but I want to address the question that you asked. I mean, I don't think we should withdraw from the 1951 convention. But maybe we've got a different understanding of this, because my understanding of the convention is that we have an obligation to process an asylum claim for people who are directly leaving a country that has persecuted them. Now, a lot of the people who are turning up in boats appear to be fleeing from the European Union. Now, I know that the European Union is, but it's not that bad. That's my understanding of the actual convention, and that is actually Rishi Sunak's understanding of the convention as well. Now, that may or may not lend any weight to the argument, but I mean, he is the Prime Minister of this country, and that is the view that he has actually expressed. Now, I haven't actually read the whole thing to know exactly what the situation is or how it's been changed by different protocols or court cases and all the rest of it. But my understanding is that that is the situation. If it's not the situation, then I don't understand how we can have a world in which it's a complete free-for-all.
Would you think exactly the same, David, if we were in Greece or we were in Turkey?
What do you mean?
Well, you were saying people can get to the European Union and then they're safe. I quite actually agree with you. But that would mean that people who were coming ended up in Italy or Greece or maybe Spain, or I'm just trying to think of all the southern coasts.
Turkey.
Sorry?
Turkey.
I think I said Turkey. I might not have. But how come they would ever move on?
Well, I think the European Union does turn away a lot of people trying to cross the Mediterranean.
What am I saying? There would be nobody, would there? Because there isn't a safe country near us. So we'd have no immigrants at all who have a right to come to us as a first...
But we're taking in tens of thousands of refugees through legal schemes. Now, we can have a discussion about whether we should actually do more on those legal routes, and I think we'd probably agree that maybe we should do more. But the situation is that I totally accept legal refugees, and there have been hundreds of thousands of legal refugees from Syria, from Ukraine, from Afghanistan, from Hong Kong. I don't know why you're frowning, but those are the facts.
Well, I'm frowning because we said it's legal for these people to come, but why is that legal and people from other countries is not legal? That's what I can't understand.
Because that is my understanding of international law.
Not international law, it's English law. I don't think it's international law.
Well, we have been talking about an international convention that we signed up to, and what we actually got here is different interpretations of it. Now, I might be wrong, but and John Kingston seems to think I am wrong. And if I am wrong, then that's fine. But don't just say, I disagree with you. It would be great to actually know what the actual situation is.
Well, if you go on there, I'll let Dan have a go.
I don't understand why. Okay. People may or may not like the Prime Minister of this country, but if the Prime Minister of this country is actually saying what I just said, then there must be some basis to it. It can't just be rubbish.
Let's. I think it might be the appropriate point to move the question on. Well, maybe someone will beaver away on his phone or her phone and find the text of the Refugee Convention and answer that question.
I have actually read that today, and it certainly doesn't lend any support to the opposite.
Right, that's very useful, and we could. But anyway, I think we've given, except that Dan wanted to say something else. No, he's. Yeah. And then that's the last point until we come back after the congregation have had their say.
Yes, well, I have two short points.
Thank you.
The first one is that I think there is a problem with classifying people as asylum seekers if they're coming from a country that's experiencing war, but not if they're coming from a country that's experiencing poverty or some other less explosive course of disaster. And the second one is, Aaron mentioned earlier a situation where people coming into Britain are thrown into a situation of lawlessness where they can't have a bank account and they have to exist outside of the law. And do you think it's preferable to have that system where people can't just go and get a job and start paying taxes?
No, not at all. People shouldn't be coming in the back of his car and coming over there and sneaking in.
They're coming anyway.
They should be coming legally. If they're coming illegally, that's a situation we can't cope with. I had a guy from Russia who was living in my last apartment block, sleeping on the stairs. And he said he'd come over here, he'd seen all the adverts, Britain's a lovely rich place, you'd come here, you'd get given a house and given this and given the other. And he came over here, he's been here 3 months, he's been sleeping in the park in Bournemouth Gardens. And he had no way of getting anywhere because he was illegal. He couldn't apply for anything, he couldn't.
So you think the only solution is to tell them they shouldn't come here?
Yes. And at that stage, yes. Because if you come here illegally, you're worse off than someone else.
Yeah. And then you're going to commit crime, aren't you? To survive, basically.
Can I come in with another point?
No. I'm going to exercise the chairman's prerogative here that we are going to move on because the asylum, the refugee system is but part of the issue. I think the next question we ought to look at is basically Aaron's claim is that we are full up. We're full up and it's not fair that immigrants should jump the queue. And I think that's whether or not they're refugees. Yep. Now, does anyone in the panel want to contribute to that debate and say, no, we've got plenty of space?
I don't want to say we've got plenty of space, which is not absolutely true. I agree. I've actually said it's an impossible situation. I've no idea what the solution is. I admit that. I'm saying from a different point of view. But the gold band, they're not automatically on gold band. I do know that. The gold band at the moment in Bournemouth is basically if you're homeless, literally homeless and have children. And it doesn't matter what nationality it is, and that's just a fact because I spend time talking to the council. And that is just a fact.
As a person that's been homeless and living in a tent, I was deemed okay because I had David's garden. The guy in front of me was deemed okay because he had his car to sleep in. He wasn't homeless, he had a car.
And I know
Anybody
that.
that comes here with not even a carrier bag full of stuff will jump to the top of the queue.
They won't go on the gold band in Bournemouth BCP area, and you're not going to get on that unless you're really ill. Unfortunately, I meet a lot of people who are homeless, and yeah, they shouldn't be homeless. It's a dreadful situation. And
they go in hotels though, and ours are on the street. I don't. It's not fair. We should look after our own first.
Why don't we do both? We could look after.
Because we haven't got the accommodation or the infrastructure, have we?
If all the people in the audience here were homeless, you divorced your wife, you got thrown out, you got whatever it is, you're going to say to all these people, this family's just arrived off the
I'm not, Aaron, I'm not saying that.
We're going to give it to them because you've
I'm
got to
saying
wait
it's
another
impossible.
10 years.
But I'm also saying it's like climate change. If we carry on like we do now and we just make token gestures, because that's all I do. I know I do. I went up to London by a coach at the weekend. I no need to. I buy more food than I need to. I know I do. So
you've agreed the figures. You know the 504,000.
Oh, I agree, Aaron. But what I'm trying, can I just go on to say, if all these people are in the world, have nowhere to go, and life is absolutely dreadful, it's going to get worse and worse and worse. And what is your solution to all these people? I don't know what the solution is. But if they're all out there with nowhere to go, they're going to try more and more to get into the country. And they're just, can you carry on with a world where a small amount are affluent and the rest aren't? I don't know. Perhaps you all think you can. I don't.
Well,
can I put some figures on what
please do.
you said?
Yes.
Because according to the United Nations, there are 250, that's their estimate, 250 million people in the world who would like to move for economic migrant reasons. They also think that they also think there's going to be another 200 million people on the move by 2050 because of climate change. So the numbers are absolutely staggering. And one of the concerns that I have is if we don't deal with this question of legal routes, okay, for the sake of argument, legal routes or people just turning up and, if we call them illegal or irregular, just turning up in boats. What is the limit of that? Because last year, it has been increasing very, very substantially, almost exponentially in the last few years. Last year we know it was 40,000. Who knows what it could be? But we've got 250 million people in this situation. who might be actually thinking, oh, let's go to the UK, let's get on those boats. I mean, what Cathy, right at the beginning of her speech, said she agreed that we cannot have unlimited migration in this sense. So my question really to Cathy would be, well, what is the limit?
I said I didn't know, and I don't know. I don't pretend to know. But I do think if there aren't any Ukrainians or Hong Kong on the boats, I think we should I said, how do we actually decide who we give sanctuary to? At the moment, I quite agree Ukraine needs it. I quite agree people from Hong Kong because we went out there. But why do we exclude the other countries? That's why I said, not so much the European Convention. It would be wonderful if all the people in the world could get together and have a conference and decide on legal routes for everybody to countries. Because if you're persecuted anywhere, you need an option of having a legal applying for a visa into England, where Ukraine and Afghanistan, most of people came on those planes. Very, very few have managed to get a visa since. So what I'm trying to say is, yes, I agree we should get legal routes to make them fairer, so more and more people have access to those legal routes. And how you do that, I'm too old to decide. My brain doesn't work.
Thank you.
Very, very briefly say, I strongly agree with Cathy's suggestion to have an international conference on this.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Dan.
So, are we full? Aaron, did your figures for how many people are coming in, which you used to suggest that these are how many extra houses we need, did that take into account the people who migrate away from this country and also the people who die?
Yes, it's net migration. No.
Okay. Also, we do have an ageing population here in the UK, and the way that occurs is that the now older generation didn't produce enough children to replace themselves. So now that
Sorry.
So now there are more older people than younger people. But what if that wasn't the case? What if they had enough children? We would have a much higher population, and we would have had to have built homes to home all of those people. And if that had happened, would you be saying we couldn't possibly build those homes? Sorry, but all those British children need to just be sent to Rwanda. We have an opportunity through immigration to replace some of those non-existent young people in the UK, because a lot of immigrants are actually young people. Some people say fighting age young men to refer to young people coming on boats, because they want to make you think that they're scary, like soldiers or something waging a war on us. But you could also say they're working age.
Or childbearing age.
And someone's going to...
Young men.
One of the problems with an ageing population is that you don't have enough workers to pay enough taxes to provide for the pensions of everyone who is now retired. And one possible solution is to have more immigrants to plug that gap.
Thank you. Aaron, and then we'll move on. I think in order to have an open discussion, we can have 5 minutes more. Well, we'll have Aaron, and then hopefully you'll be less than 5 minutes.
If nobody enters the country, we also have a positive birth rate, which means people are being replaced by more. I did have another slide for that figure, but it went by the wayside. One possible legal route into the country would be to say to every embassy on the world, which I assumed before we even got into this must be the case. You'd go into an embassy, I'd like to move to Britain, you fill out a form and they say yes or no. But if we did that, currently, people coming in from Hong Kong, all the legitimate places, they're coming into the country, but the hotel's full. We haven't got anywhere for them to go. They don't get a house, they don't get somewhere, they go on a waiting list or an immigration removal centre. However, if all the embassies in the world had this issue allocation, they'd have about like 2,000 people each. They'd be filled up by the 3rd of January from opening the doors on the 1st of January, and then for the next 360 something days, they'd be saying, sorry, we were filled up on the first day. They would be overwhelmed. So what would you say? I mean, we haven't got a quota. We're saying tens of thousands. Even if we had 1,000 immigrants a year, we haven't got anywhere. We've got 1 million plus on there. That's 1 million households on the list. It's 3.2 million people who are already waiting. So should we clear the backlog first, which requires a new Birmingham?
So let's just clear. Well, you phrase that as a question, but are you actually making a statement that we should close the doors?
I'm saying we should catch up. we should have some breathing room. We shouldn't be offering places to say, come to this country. Where am I going to stay? Well, I haven't got anywhere for you.
Okay,
There's a tent,
thank you.
there's a garden. There's food.
Dan, and each of you can make one more statement, and then we will throw it open to the House.
I'll just say for housing that I think we can radically improve the housing situation by doing a number of things. I think we should devote less space to cars, because car parking and roads take up a lot of our space. If more of us use public transport with buses and rail, then we can devote less space to cars, build homes in that spaces. I think we should have less detached houses. Maybe we should have a policy where we only grant planning permission for houses that will have a certain level of density, so maybe 4 stories high, so there's more room for people to live in. We do have it's a radical problem, so we do need some radical solutions. We could probably turn Eton's grounds into social housing, as well as Buckingham Palace, and that area of Dartmoor that recently said they're not going to allow wild cannabis can also be requisitioned.
Thank you. Right, Cathy, would you like to make some closing remarks?
I don't think I really got one, because the more and more I thought about it, the sadder it's got. And I think my grandson's children will be very lucky if they live the affluent life we all living now want to live. And I think we've got to necessarily globally change our ways, and I can't see us doing it. So I just feel it's very sad.
Indeed. Aaron?
No, I'm good.
You're good. David?
Yeah, I would like to say that I'm actually pretty proud of the record that we've got of taking in tens of thousands of refugees to this country from the countries we've mentioned: Syria, Afghanistan, Hong Kong, Ukraine. Maybe we can do more, and I think that's absolutely fine. But I don't think we should be encouraging anarchy and lawlessness. And I think that by not solving this problem of migrants turning up in boats and just allowing that to just increase exponentially, I think we're encouraging anarchy and lawlessness. And I think as humanists we do actually support the rule of law, and I think that's that we should support the government in trying to solve that problem.
I'll just have a quick point on that one.
You may.
Yeah, 3/4 of those people who go through to appeal, who come here as illegally, do get accepted in. So they're still coming in, and it's still a problem.
They come here illegally, but then they get accepted, so they're not illegal.
So they weren't illegal ever then?
Well,
No, but anyway, that seems a petty dispute in a way. Okay, thank you very much, panel. Are we ready to start throwing it all open to everybody now? Before we start, I'd just like to ask if anyone has been busy on his or her laptop and found the Refugee Convention. Ah, shucks. We need a teenager here. Oh, Steve, have you? No. Oh, okay. Right.
Isn't it 200 pages?
Probably, yes.
Amnesty does have a very good summary, but I didn't like to say amnesty because it could be a slightly... I tried not to go towards amnesty, or just the numbers.
Right. Okay. I think I'll give Simon the first chance, because his arm's going to get tired before you other two young men.
Right, well, a really important topic to raise. Terrific. I love the sort of bomb that's waiting for us in Cathy's visual. I felt it was the wrong question, however, because this idea of, do you want as many as we've got? Do you want more? Do you want less? I mean, I think every sane person agrees there's got to be some limit. But the point is, right-wing governments who've got themselves elected, Brexited, whatever, by kind of on the back of a bit of xenophobia, have completely failed to address the problem in terms of, I mean, there's this real obsession about these boat people who are, it's like the kind of Norman invasion all over again or something. But I don't know, I mean, the figure that I saw was a record 57,000 might have come in 2022 by boat. Well, that's a tenth of the net migration, so it's not the big picture, it's the sort of sensational end of it. And we've had, more than a decade of right-wing governments. We had David Cameron saying it's got to be in the tens of thousands. So, the real question is, how do you deal with immigration in a way that is more effective and fairer than what we've got? But I just do want to make the point that since the real question is how, not how many, it has been a real trope of the culture wars. You think of Donald Trump get elected. I mean, the USA have got a far bigger illegal immigration problem than we have. It's vastly greater. So you get Trump elected on, we'll build a wall, as if that would work, or whatever. Who needs more walls in the world? I'm thinking back to my childhood and a right-wing campaign that said, if you want a nigger for your neighbour, vote Labour. It goes back a long way. You get Enoch Powell, the rivers of blood, sort of echoing, up and nine Chairman David talking about the violence that could come. So behind this thing, where the real question is how you address it, there is a whole lot of right-wing culture wars humbug. I would argue.
Yes, I think David ought to have the chance.
The same as Enoch Powell, You didn't issue your threats in Latin, But
Yes. I think a very quick answer from you, David.
I just wanted to respond to the. You said that the boat, boat people, just shorthand, turning up. You said it's a small part of the total picture of say 500,000. Agreed, but the bigger picture is that people are, students. They're coming because they've got jobs, they've got accommodation. That is I'm saying that is a different problem, because the 40,000 or 50,000 people who are turning up just with nothing on the shore, they then either have to be put up in migration centres, which then got overwhelmed last year, we know that happened, and then they get put into hotels. And that's costing something like £2 billion a year. I mean, it's a huge amount of money that we're spending on trying to sort of deal with that.
Employing torpedo boats that kind of sink vessels in the channel. There isn't a simple way to stop it.
I'm not saying there is a simple way to stop it, but I'm saying that we should be supporting the government to do to solve that problem.
Okay, I'm going to use my prerogative as chairman to butt in here. Probably the best way of solving it would be if we had a Home Office which actually did its job. If it takes over a year to process an asylum claimant, it has something to do with running down public services.
It's on average 2 weeks.
Average two?
It's on average.
Since when?
It's about 2 weeks for a regular person coming in who's got a trail.
Hang on. No, actually, I think we're going to have to give a chance, because I'm conscious that we've got only 20 minutes or so left. I've noted that this is something you guys want to come back on, but can we move on to Roger? Roger?
Yes. Obviously, I quite a lot to say on the subject, but I'll try and keep it short. There's 3 points I want to make quickly, if I can remember them. I wouldn't always trust the figures, because as was mentioned, there's an awful lot of students come on visas which aren't, when they leave the country, they're not all, a lot of them aren't signed out as having left the country. So obviously there's a lot coming in. I think the question on the word illegal immigrants is a bit difficult, because even though they're not illegal, they're strictly not illegal because they haven't committed a crime. Most things associated with illegal is having committed a crime. I can't remember what their third point was. But the question I was going to ask is specifically to David and Aaron. With particular being reference to being humanists, why do you think it's okay to kind of create a them and us scenario, or in and out in the case of immigration? It's okay people to look after people in the country, but not for people outside the country. Particularly when the vast majority of immigrants are for economical reasons, which, as was pointed out, we're partly responsible for creating this problem where we're not self-sustaining where we could be, and we're exploiting a lot of farmland and a lot of these other countries. They've created this situation now and historically.
I think, yes. David, if you don't mind, I'll ask one of the other panel members to answer that. I think I know exactly how you would have answered it, and we'll just see.
He addressed it to us.
Yeah. No, I don't intend to answer it. I intend to ask, actually, Dan, do you feel able to answer that question?
No.
Okay.
Why ask the panel to do it? This is our time. Let the people make their points. We don't need a response from each of the panel after each point, because they're going to say something in the end anyway. They saved it for them.
Okay.
What if you ask us a question if you want us to respond?
Well, yes.
Yeah.
But I
Yes.
leave it as a rhetorical question.
I've just remembered my third point, which is about the housing. In this country, the ratio between homeless families and empty houses is 1 to 12, which is the largest in Europe and one of the largest in the world.
Sorry, can you explain that
The
again?
ratio of people homeless to empty homes, empty houses.
So you're saying there are more empty houses than there are?
Yes, it's about 1 to 10, depending what distance it's 1 to 10, 1 to 12, which is one of the largest in Europe. I think it is the largest in Europe.
We are the
Thank you.
laundering capital of the world.
Sorry. Phil, sorry. Steve's turn.
My question would have been exactly the same as Simon's. I was literally saying it's a shame the whole thing has been used as this net 500,000 migrants. In actual, when all the time we're talking about 50,000 so-called illegals or refugees or whatever else. And the 450,000 that are on top of that have all been completely legal and by government choice. They've all been issued visas, and and it's not. You can't say they're a different thing because they take up housing just as much as anybody else. And there's nearly 200,000 students, and you both mentioned this all started with Tony Blair, but the government that are in at the moment have been in for nearly 15 years. And Boris Johnson relaxed all the international visas on students just to sort of try and sweetheart deals on trade deals with India and other countries. So we've got 200,000 students in, all taking up housing. And we're talking about the 50,000. As I say, I'm sure that's a smoke screen. And the bigger issue is the immigration that's being allowed.
I think we were addressing both of those.
It didn't sound like it.
Well, I certainly was. That was my intention anyway.
So that's all by government choice. So if we cut down on the amount of visas that are issued, that would solve a lot of the problem.
Are students taking up housing? Aren't they actually taking rooms or?
Yes, I'm living with 4 Indians who are doing exactly that.
So
they're perfectly decent people, but they are taking up housing.
But they're not taking up like a place on the housing list. They're living with other people.
No, they're not taking up people on the council housing list. You're right there.
Trying to go and wait for their tuition as well. On the students paying about 3 times the English rate for the tuition at the university.
They are paying for their tuition. I'm not nothing against it being here. You know what I mean? I say they're perfectly okay.
And they're adding to the economy.
I'm saying is that people seem to be ignoring that as the figure. They're a huge part of the migration issue. I mean, they are paying their way, of course.
Phil, if we...
Well, I just wanted to add one statistic to David's. He mentioned 250 million worldwide looking to migrate. There's 90 million worldwide who own 56% of the world's resources and money and wealth. That amplifies the point there about England being the money laundering capital of the world, and people buying houses in London and leaving them empty. I mean, that's a key political problem that could be resolved relatively. You said it.
I don't know how.
Yes.
I agree, it's scandalous, but I don't know quite how you solve that.
No.
So I don't know your name. Dave, right.
Yeah, I'm a bit confused about this evening. What you're trying to do with this debate. It's framed immigration as a problem. Was that the intention, just to discuss it as a problem? Because why haven't we heard about the opportunities?
Yeah.
It's been totally one-sided, and all credit to the panel. You're brave to get up there and do it.
So tell us about the opportunities.
Well, I can't do this, just in a scattergun way, and I wouldn't want to, because that'd be rather puerile. But the problem is, when you're trying to understand the nature of the problem and how the impact of it, you need some kind of measure, something to measure the problem against. So on the equation, there's a cost. So you've all been talking about costs, all four of you. You've all been framing your arguments. There's a cost. You've also been framing the argument as those types of immigrants that aren't adding value. They're refugees, and we've got to put loads of costs.
Don't put words into our mouth, though, because I don't think...
No, I'm just saying this is my view.
Because I don't think...
I'm just saying this is my view, David. All right? This is just my view. So listen to my view. I listen to your view. So I think all four of you have, either inadvertently or deliberately, I don't know, put it in a cost basis. Let me give you an example of the added value that immigrants can bring, which could negate entirely, possibly. I don't know, because I haven't done the calculation. But do any of you watch this brilliant programme on TV called The Surgeons or something like that? Very gory,
No.
Is it Tuesday night, something like that? Where, the camera's in a hospital and they're doing the most complex operations you could ever imagine. No, you watched it?
I don't have television.
Right, okay. And I was saying to my wife last week, have you noticed how many immigrants there are doing this most incredible surgery to save people's lives, including all indigenous white people that have been here for generations' lives? That's the kind of value that immigrants can bring, and I've heard nothing about that this evening.
Can I just apologise for that, because I only had 10 minutes, so I decided to go on one thing, and I utterly agree with you, and I'm sorry that we missed that out. Perhaps we should have got together a bit more and decided what we were going to talk about. I just did the one bit I was passionate about, but I did write an article, Humanistically Speaking, and in that I did actually say the masses of value we do add, and I slightly said, a hint, that little girl, she's 16, she's going to be an achievement to England. I'm sorry we missed it out. I meant to put it in. I didn't have time to put it in.
I think we're better allowed...
I do need to challenge this, because I did actually say in my speech that I think that immigration to fill jobs that we can't fill with indigenous population is absolutely...
But it goes way beyond that.
I know.
It goes way beyond that.
Yeah, of course it does.
Yes. I think, David, we'll have to give other people a chance. We've only got 10 minutes left. John, I think you... I'm sorry.
Related to that, really, but when you asked about at the beginning, what should the level of immigration be? I mean, it's related. You can't come up with a particular figure because it depends on a number of things. At the moment, as everyone is aware, I'm sure, we have an acute shortage of labour. And that shortage of labour is largely because we're not getting people in from the European Union who we used to. And so we're not getting enough immigration. The housing issue that Aaron was talking about at such length, we don't have the people to build the houses. It's not just a question of space. We desperately need people here to do things like build houses. After the war, we had a huge expansion in housing when we were in a desperately poor situation after the war. But as well as funding the NHS, we also built a vast number of council houses. Now we're not doing that now. We could do that with more labour. We could do that with more will, and if we taxed wealth. Just one more small thing about this to and fro the legality. The point is, and I'm not an expert at all in the international law, but Cathy's said a number of times he pointed to Suella Braverman being interrogated by House of Commons Committee, and she was asked what is the legal route for people who don't happen to be in one of the countries that we have a special arrangement with, and there wasn't one. There isn't, and that's what we cannot to label some people as illegal because they're coming from countries that we don't happen to. What we should do is we should have the possibility of people applying from their countries if they're being persecuted, whatever, to come over here. We, as was said again, it can't just be the neighbouring countries. That would be absurd. And so
Thank you very much, John. Right, we are really running very short on time. The gentleman with a white beard, who's Adrian. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, I think history can teach us a lot and can provide plenty of examples. And if we look back at periods around the world where there's been uncontrolled migration, I would assert that it has never done the indigenous population any good, culturally or in any other way whatsoever. Take Prussians, most people are familiar with that term, but the original Prussians were a Slavic tribe, not Germanic. They were completely exterminated by Germanic tribes. What happened to the native New Zealanders, Maoris, when white people went there? All but obliterated. The same with Aboriginals in Australia. Same with Japanese. The people we consider Japanese now are not the original indigenous Japanese people. They were invaders. Take the whole of the North American continent. I don't think white migration there has done the Native American movement any good whatsoever. In every single case, I'm sure, and you might be able to provide me with some alternative examples, but I would assert that culturally they've been damaged, they've been hindered, and disease has been brought upon them, and in many cases almost all but exterminated.
I would argue that that's not the same.
Yes. No. Any other points from the floor?
What about the Romans?
Oh.
Yeah, what did the Romans do?
And the Normans.
Concrete, roads, the arts.
Apart from all that.
You've got to remember the Hypocrites.
Yes, they didn't do much good for the Iceni. No. Roger, you had another point.
It was a new point. I just want to cross-examine that point just made by the gentleman there in the white.
Adrian.
I think historically, obviously, those immigrations were invading to get precious resources and stuff to make the things. But we now have, I would argue, the knowledge and technology to actually create food in abundance. So nobody needs to live in an environment where there is no food. We now have to produce fresh water, clean water all around the world, when a third of the global population, at least some point in the year, is water starved. People get better hungry and stuff, so they're forced to migrate for better living. If we were more solution oriented, we could help fix a lot of these problems in these countries because we know how to do it. Instead of, the largest fertilizer plant in the world is in Africa, and it's drying up the riverbeds and the rest of the stuff, and we know how to provide a lot of solutions. So a lot of these people aren't forced to migrate to richer countries, so we can actually help them in their own countries, because the majority is for economical reasons.
Please, I'm sorry, I've forgotten your name as well.
Frank. Yeah.
Frank, yes.
We're trying to tackle with the outflow of the situation when actually in fact it's US, NATO, UK that's causing a hell of a lot of trouble in this world right now, and it's continuing. So if you don't stop that, the warmongers from America, then it will continue. Get to the source of the problem, and then you'll start, the answer will come from there.
Exactly, America's the problem.
Right. Oh dear, so after an hour and 20 minutes we've got to the source of the problem, which sounds good. We've got 5 minutes to exploit that. And
we did get rid of Blair and Bush, so it's fine.
Oh, good. Simon.
A very short thing, amplifying something I think David said. I once had a heart operation and suffering from atrial fibrillation, very, very ill. And I was given this treatment and involved putting an electric shock through my body with metal plates on something else. Anyway, I sort of came to suddenly, bang, with a kind of high that you get when you're sort of full of anaesthetic. And I was surrounded by about 10 people because it's a fairly intense sort of life and death kind of Frankenstein-like situation. And there wasn't a single Brit there. You know, there were a variety of facial colours, a variety of accents. And it was just after the Brexit vote. And I apologised to them. It wasn't just after Brexit, it was after one of these sort of big debates of this nature that immigrants are all problems. And you just thought, Christ, I'm surrounded by these wonderful people. Why would one ask, are they one of us? Or are they kind of foreigners that have come in? It's just not the question you ask in those situations.
Indeed. Yes. I'm tempted to say because all the British trained doctors have gone to the States.
They've been poached.
Yes, I'm just... Yeah, please do. Just 1 minute tops.
Simon, thanks for that. I really hope that you don't... that is not the view that you think that's come across from either me or Aaron. I mean, this is not about individuals. It's about...
Well, we are individuals. You know,
but it's not...
You say, you guys are just a problem. You know, I'm not going to talk about individuals. Because us, in life, we meet individuals. And an awful lot of the impressive ones, actually, they're not 100%.
But we've not been reframing it in that way. We've been talking about numbers and we've been talking about the problem more generally. We haven't been saying, oh, well, we don't like that doctor because he's Indian or whatever. That's certainly not where we're coming from. And I really want to make sure that
I don't think anyone thinks that you do think that.
Well,
every one of, you know, the large number of people that you're talking about is an individual person.
Well, if we can leave that to rest there, but oh no, we can't because Dan wants to say something.
David's managed to make 3 additional statements, so I'd like to make one.
Yes.
I'd just like to respond to something that Simon and David, not our Simon and David, the other our Simon and David said about the how we framed the conversation on a certain figure of immigrants and saying, are we happy with this number? Should we have more? Should we have less? Can we tolerate this number of immigrants? But the truth is that when we were planning this discussion, the idea was that we would all share our general ideas about how we feel about immigration, and it was up to us to decide which ideas we'd share. And I talked about the benefits that I think immigrants have on our culture. And then at 4 o'clock today, Aaron sent everyone an email saying we should ask everyone how they feel about the number of immigrants. This is the number. Should we have more or less? And that was added, and it's made it seem as if the conversation is about whether we should have more or less immigrants, but that's not the talk I'm prepared for, and I don't think that's the talk any of us.
Thank you very much. I was not aware of that, I'm afraid. But I think I wasn't intending to ask the general question as to whether you change your mind as to the number of immigrants, because clearly the debate is far more nuanced than that. One thing that has come out of this, to me, it's crystal clear, is the discussion whether, as humanists, we feel responsible primarily for the British people or primarily for everybody in the world. Now, I don't think we can give fair justice to that in the remaining minute. Sorry?
Yes.
What I will ask is to have a quick show of hands, including from the panel, as to whether any of you have changed your views during the next hour, the last hour and a half, hour and 3/4. Could anyone put their hand up to say if they've changed their views either against or to increase that number of immigrants, or to decrease them, or to decide it's not such a problem, or to as you first thought, or that we really should have an international conference to try and sort it out, as Cathy suggested. So could anyone put their hand up if they feel they've been persuaded by anything anyone has said this evening?
I was very persuaded by Cathy.
Oh, put your hand up then. David?
Yeah, I already said that I was persuaded by Cathy's idea for like a COP conference for this.
Yes.
I got that from The Economist, some article. Well, I agree with it, but it started with didn't originate with me.
Yes. True, if you are unpersuaded by everybody.
Oh, I'm unpersuaded. The audience have all come forward with an idealistic, we want to save the world, but nobody has led a route to get there. None of you. That's the issue. On a realistic chair, we have this, the hotel is full, people sleeping on the lawn outside, a million waiting and there's no answer, and nobody has come to the solution.
I do, Darren.
I think Roger did.
You didn't have enough time.
We need about 20 different separate working groups to
Yeah.
What about turning Eton into social housing?
Sorry?
What about turning Eton into social housing?
What?
Turning Eton and Buckingham Palace.
I think there are very good solutions. Like Phil's one, all the empty houses in England. Stop Airbnb.
Ladies and gentlemen, we'll carry on this discussion in the bar. I think there's plenty to discuss, but those who've had enough of us will want to go home.